Welcome everyone to the virtual Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival. My name is Neil Popish. I am the program director with the Jewish Community Center, a division of Jewish Nevada. Special thanks to the Robinson and Frankoff families for their sponsorship and dedication to Jewish film. I also want to thank Joshua Abbey and the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival for the wonderful partnership we have formed. I'd like to thank all of our host sponsors that will be listed on your screen. In addition, I would like to thank all the sponsors and producers that will be listed on your screen as well. We hope that you have enjoyed our series of films and webinars. Please visit the newly updated Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival website at www.lvjff.org for updates and links to our past webinars. I would like to make sure everyone knows that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available tomorrow on the Jewish Nevada YouTube page. I also want to let everybody know, and this may be a surprise to many of you, that everyone here today will be entered in a raffle for a free case of premium kosher wines from Covenant Wineries. The winner will be announced at the end of the webinar. Once the Q&A with our panelists is finished, I will then ask questions from you, our participants. If you have a question for any of our panelists, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and we will ask as many questions as we can in the time allotted. We're honored to welcome our panelists for today's webinar. First, we have Mark Tchelistcheff. Mark is the grandnephew of the subject of today's film, André, the voice of wine. Mark is a director, cinematographer, and producer. He is the founder of Open Films, an international production company focused on films, documentaries, commercials, multimedia, and television content. Mark's work has been seen on television globally, and his films have been in festivals around the world, from Berlin to Tokyo to Telluride. We also have Jeff Morgan. Jeff is a winemaker, writer, cookbook author, and co-founder of Covenant Wines, the world's premier kosher wine producer. The former West Coast editor of Wine Spectator magazine, Morgan began his wine career in his mid-30s. In 2003, he co-founded Covenant Winery, dedicated to making highly regarded kosher wine in America and Israel. Also joining us, as always, is our Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival director, Joshua Abbey. Joshua, take it away.
Thank you, Neil, so much. Thank you to the JCC and Jewish Nevada and everyone who is with us today participating. We have two very special guests, Jeff Morgan and Mark Tchelistcheff, and he is actually in Germany at 2 a.m. in the morning. So good morning, Mark. We have a little bit of an audio issue, so we've kind of patched our wires to make it happen, and we just ask you to excuse any limitations with the audio, but we should be okay. Before we begin our conversation about Mark's very moving and personal documentary portrait of his great uncle, André, I want to ask Jeff, in the context of a Jewish film festival and where we're having this webinar broadcast from, to, let's say in 30 seconds or less, Jeff, help us understand the 4,000-year-old history and significance of wine in the context of Jewish culture and tradition. And by 30 seconds, I'm making light of it, of course.
One thing, Jews have a tendency to talk a lot. I'm going to try to keep it short, but I want to thank Mark for making this marvelous film. And anybody who has not seen this film needs to see it. I finally saw it just a few days ago, the entire film. It's an extraordinary representation and of the life of his granduncle, André Tchelistcheff, who I saw somebody said they lived in Sonoma 30 years and they had never heard of André. Well, those of us in the wine business, at least for the last 30 years, that would include me, pretty much revered André Tchelistcheff as being the wine tzaddik that he was. He basically brought California wine to a new level, and through his work at BV Winery, and also through all of the people that you'll see in Mark's movie, who were interviewed, all the winemakers he worked with, he has shaped all of our lives and influenced all of us who make wine and who knew him or who knew the people that he worked with. So kudos to you, Mark, for putting together really an extraordinary film that I will gladly watch over and over again, just when I need a jolt of inspiration. And I also want to say that, you know, as I watched the film, I realized that André's life mirrored the Jewish experience in many ways. André was, he had to flee his homeland in Russia several times apparently, but finally he was exiled in a sense, and he had to find life in new worlds. First he went to France, and when that didn't work, he finally found California. And he basically had his own personal diaspora, which ultimately ended back in Europe and even in Crimea, which I didn't know that he had returned to late in life. So he did that full circle that I think the Jewish people are also doing. We started, as everybody knows, in the Middle East, in what is now Israel, and we had to leave our home on several occasions because of war and et cetera, et cetera. And I think today, a lot of Jews who had their own diaspora in Europe and in America are finding their way back to Israel, the way André found his way back to Eastern Europe and also Italy. I didn't even know that he had been so instrumental in creating Ornellaia, which, as many of us wine geeks know, is, you know, one of the great Super Tuscans. I mean, it's an extraordinary movie for Jews and non-Jews alike. If you want to think about what it means to be exiled, what it means to be an immigrant, and how to deal with it. I know that was more than 30 seconds.
That's
Sorry,
okay.
Josh.
That's a wonderful answer. I just want to move to the next question so we can get Mark engaged here. The trauma that André experienced throughout his life, it shaped his connection to the importance of creating roots for himself and for his art as a winemaker. Mark, how do you feel his personal history guided his destiny?
Oh, let's see here.
Hold on. Wait.
I'm not hearing you.
Okay.
Wait a sec. Huh? Technical problem here. Do you have your phone on? Is the phone? I'm going to try you again. Hold on.
Okay, thank you everyone for bearing with us. I did give you a warning we were having some audio challenges as we're trying to communicate to Mark, who is in Germany.
Hello, can everybody else hear me?
Yes, thank goodness. You're on board. Did you hear my question?
Excellent. Yes, I heard your question, and if everybody can hear me, first I would like to say is thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be part of this wonderful festival that you've created, and very much appreciative to be here. I'm sorry if I'm not as erudite or lucid as I possibly can be here at 2 in the morning. I'm actually in Slovenia. I was just in Italy in some vineyards of some relatives of mine, and then came over to Slovenia to be in a little hotel and to see some friends. And so I would have some internet, because where I was, I had zero internet. So I'm glad that this is working somehow, even though the sound may be an issue. I hope everybody can hear me. You know, André, at the end of the film, you say there's a little statement about how his life is, everything he did is by necessity. Obviously, those of you who've seen the film know that he went through many different periods and difficult periods in his life, from his early childhood, from almost passing away before the advent of penicillin, and then later on, fleeing the Moscow area during the Russian Revolution, and then in the Civil War, then finally joining the White Army and then leaving. And all of these things, I think, shaped him as a person. The loss. I mean, he only owned one winery in his whole life, where he owned 50% of it, and that was Buena Vista. And after he lost that deal, he never wanted to own a winery again. He said, "I guess the loss thing really had an effect on him and his life. And he was a very simple man in that sense, and he really gave back, and he believed in giving back rather than just taking." And I think that's a story which, as you said, Jeff, earlier, transcends all people of all types and all religions. When we've had to lose our lands, and so many are losing them today, being forced to flee and due to different reasons. And I think that also had a big impact on him as well.
Mark, talk. Can you hear me? Talk briefly about your motivation to take on this project.
The motivation for the project, well, first of all, I was making films prior to making this film. So I'd made numbers of documentary films, and I thought that, this is a great story. A friend of mine kept pushing me to make a film about it, and then that was in 2007. There was the Vintners Hall of Fame, the first one on March 9th, and I said, well, I'll go film that. So I filmed that, and actually spent whatever $3,000 filming that day, and none of that footage is in my film. I have over 300 hours of material, 350 hours of material that I made into a 98-minute film. And the main motivation was this incredible story of a man, and it wasn't necessarily because he was my great uncle. And it made it even harder to make this film because he was related to me. But it was more of a story which I felt that people should know and be inspired. I mean, I think especially in today, where greed and respect has gone, let's say, greed has come in and respect gone out the window in a way. And this, to me, I think it's a really great film for people of all walks of life. Okay, we can do something at a level and find our passions.
I think you fully achieved that, Mark. It's a remarkably beautiful, meaningful, current, and powerful inspiration for anyone who has the privilege to watch it, and to make a permanent record of such an amazing individual's life on film, especially in his story. Is a great mitzvah, as we say in Jewish culture, which means a great blessing for all of us. This is for both of you. The values expressed in the film by the Vine Whisperer is what I'm understood he's called. And correct me, Jeff, if I'm mangling his name. Is it Greg Lafayette? Lafayette. Alquimista?
Alchemista, exactly.
Okay. Where he said that planting and tending vineyards to produce fine wine is, quote, telling the story of the land, the earth, rocks, the sun, wind, and rain, understanding and knowing the voices of the land, end of quote. His words relay a great respect and responsibility for the stewardship and protection of the environment. How does winemaking educate and contribute to greater public awareness about the importance of caring for nature? You want to tackle that first, Jeff?
Sure. Well, I know Greg. I haven't seen him for a while, but I really loved what he said. I also loved him walking through the vineyard with his bagpipes. That was Greg, wasn't it? Yes. And
Yes, it was.
And I think that what Greg was expressing, and to bring this back to Judaism, because that's kind of my job here, is to he was talking about what it is about wine that makes it so special for many cultures, okay, in addition to Judaism. I mean, for us, it's a portal. And I think for André, it was a portal to civilization. It was a portal to culture, and it was also a portal to community. Wine opens doors for us. Wine helps us realize a connection, dare I say a covenant, that exists between the universe, nature, the earth, ourselves, and it's very evident when you work with the grapes, when you work with the vines, when you walk the vines, and you see these grapes transformed into something beautiful that can enhance not only a table, but can also sanctify the Sabbath, which is what wine does for us as Jews. We sanctify the Sabbath every Friday night and every Saturday with the fruit of the vine, with wine, and also special occasions, because I think only wine, or wine is the only comestible that has this ability to transcend agriculture, nature, art, spirituality, and it all comes together in our glass.
Beautiful answer, thank you. And you, Mark? What about the relationship between wine and the land?
Well, I think André was a very early promoter of ecology. In the 1930s, he was already, late 30s, he was already talking about the ecology of the land. And I think we have, as human beings, a stewardship over our land, and as winemakers and those who have the vineyards have a great responsibility in taking care of our earth, as we do everywhere in the world at this point. I mean, it's our responsibility to take care of these wonderful vines. I mean, those were André's children, and I think that for him, being able, and I think the advent of all of this, also organic wines, and I think he would love it. I think he'd love the fact that people will take more care of the land, less chemicals on the land, which would then seep into the groundwaters and all that. I think that it's really important, and I feel that the trend towards that is, obviously for the bigger corporations it's more difficult, but for the smaller winemakers, that trend to really take care of and be stewards is there, and I'm glad to see that.
That was one of the most salient truths that the film taught me, was the relationship between the respect and promotion of the values of protecting the environment and winemaking as an art and a tradition. I'd never really been fully aware of that connection, which was beautifully illustrated. And to your point, Mark, André said everything in winemaking, wine industry, wine philosophy, and wine morals is directly related to ecology. With the advent of the climate crisis, exemplified by the recent devastating wildfires in California, in the wine country, and throughout the West, what will be the short and long-term impact of a rapidly and extremely changing environment on the California wine industry? Jeff?
Well, good question. I think we need to remember that we have weathered many storms in the past in our wine industry that at times we thought were insurmountable. There was a phylloxera, which was the vine louse that practically wiped out the entire world wine industry, but it started right here in California. And of course, we've had significant droughts and other issues that have affected us. Prohibition, another classic example of a man-made disaster. Perhaps climate changes as well. And certainly it's involved in the challenge of what we're experiencing now in the wine country. I think we're learning to live with the vicissitudes of nature as nature is being affected by various man-made intrusions, such as the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And viticulture is flexible. Humans are flexible. We're going to learn how to live with, we're going to deal with fires better now that we've been through four giant fire seasons in the last 5 years, through better management of our forests, different management of the canopies of our vines. We might have to plant different vines to adapt to the new climate. For example, I've been making wine from a vineyard in the Carneros region of Napa for the last 10 years, which is a cooler part of Napa. And we've always made Pinot Noir, which is a cool climate grape from this vineyard, a phenomenal vineyard. It belongs to a guy named Francis Mahoney. Well, in the last 5 years, Francis has seen a change, and he has planted Cabernet Sauvignon in his vineyard right next to that cool climate Pinot Noir. And that Cabernet is now, for the last 2 years, been going into my best Cabernets. So normally we didn't think we could grow Cabernet and ripen Cabernet in this way, this far south in Napa, in the cooler parts of the valley. So we're going to have to adapt. We are adapting, and we're going to be just fine, but it's not going to be easy.
We very much appreciate your faith and optimism. Those are the words we need to hear right now. Thank you for that. To me, the most profound message in the film was André's acute awareness of the multi-generational nature and continuity of both the vines and the people who tend them. His selfless commitment to sharing knowledge and cultivating young people to carry on the work, I believe, was at the core of his character. Would you agree, Mark?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of his life, or let's say the last 30, 40 years, and even when he first came to America, he was just giving. I mean, and he believed in that generational thing. He believed in what he called his kids carrying on the ideas and becoming even better than him, and hoping that they would become better than him. And I think it's something which, we all, I hope in some ways, as we get older, I'm past my mid 50s, and hopefully I'm giving back as much as I can to the world as well. And I think it's a very important part of again, not having this greed that has overtaken a certain aspect of our societies, instead to give rather than just to take. And André was, the epitome of that. I mean, he didn't even have a cellar himself. When people would give him a beautiful bottle of wine, he'd open it or he'd keep it under his bed. And the next person that came in, he'd share that with them. And it's that sharing aspect that's so important. And speaking of the Pinot Noir, his 46 and 47 were amazing. I don't know if you ever had André's. And he was the first one to say really Pinot Noir should be planted in Carneros. I don't know if you knew that, Jeff.
I didn't.
And I think with the climate change, he would also be saying, okay, we have to look at it differently. He was always giving one student, let's say Rob Davis, do this task, and they didn't give another student, Michael Salacci, another task, and then they talk to each other and said, he's making me do this, and I'm doing this. And, he was testing, he was seeing what was happening, and he was always willing to do more with technology and learn more and try and make failures and make mistakes. And in fact, André said the 46 and 47 were his favorite Pinots, but it was only half of 47, because in 1947, he had Maynard Amarine was a friend of his, and Maynard said, I have this new refining, I want to do gelatin refining. And André took half of his Pinot and did gelatin refining, and half his Pinot the way he did it before, which was egg white refining. And he really didn't like the gelatin, but he was willing to try. And if it, when we try, we sometimes, it doesn't come out the best way we want. And I think that's the other thing is that, we all need to find our passions. We all need to try and do the best we can. And we don't do it every day. As human beings, we all make mistakes, but we keep doing it and we keep trying and we do our best. And I think going back to the aspect of nature, I think again we have to, with what happens in the vineyards and how we take care, stewards of our land around the globe. I mean, when you think about one positive thing of COVID is the fact that we've had a breathing room for Earth to breathe a little bit more. I mean, in some ways, in some areas, less pollution. But it's been a terrible, devastating thing for humanity as well, though. But
I think. Let me interrupt you, Mark. I'm sorry. There's no question that adaptation played a major role in André's life, and that probably he more than most understood the necessity of it and how to utilize it, and was not intimidated by it, and that was exemplified also in his history.
Josh, can I just say
Yeah, please jump in.
So one thing that Mark touched on was André's ability to teach. And it's very apparent in this film, the influence that he had on his students, his clients, all of the winemakers who were coming up and learning from him, because he was very generous with his knowledge. He didn't have secrets, okay? He wasn't trying to keep anything back. He was trying to spread the wealth of his knowledge. And I had the brief and good fortune of meeting André shortly before he died. And I had lunch with him in New York. And I was just like in my mid-30s at the time, coming up. I hadn't even moved to California yet. I was just starting my so-called career. And I have to tell you, I'll never forget that lunch. He was so inspiring. He was so generous. He was so engaging and so encouraging. And I think that's the secret to a great teacher. It's not just the knowledge that they share. It's the way they share it, how they impart it, and how they inspire you to take that knowledge to the next level.
Is that spirit of mentorship and nurturing future generations in the art of winemaking still as prevalent today?
Well, most definitely it is. I have quite a few, actually not a few, I have a few very important mentors who have taken me under their wing. I never studied at Davis. I never studied anything really, except music. That was my first career. But the winemaking community is very generous with sharing knowledge, and I try to do that too. I've got two young guys working in my cellar this harvest who, had never made wine before. They're already better at hauling hoses than I ever was. So I'm hoping to inspire them to make a career of it as well.
Let's talk about the relationship between the corporate controlled aspects of the wine industry and the remaining private wineries like yourself, Jeff. How has the corporate, in the film, it seems to imply that, the corporate intrusion into the wine world had a lot of compromises that were part of it. Do you want to tackle that, Mark? What you found is in your investigation about, André obviously had reservations.
I think, André understood. He was a man that also understood both the needs of the corporation and the needs of the wine, the little winemaker or the big winemaker. He also understood the needs of bringing wine to the market. But he also felt that, the winemaker needed their smaller projects. Let's say if you work like he did for, a company that he could do certain projects that would give him inspiration to continue. And sometimes the corporations don't do that. And then corporations also, that's one reason he left BV at that time with Hugh Blind. After a number of years, he wasn't given the reins that he felt that he could do to make good wine. But actually, that was a real blessing, because he found another opportunity to give more time and to spend more time with all of these other winemakers. And had he just stayed at BV and Abet, Buena Vista, and a couple others, then the rest of the world wouldn't have had as much time of his last 30 years, and that was, I think, fantastic for the wine world and for him, because he always felt, when I've taught, I often get more from my students than maybe they get from me, and he felt that way about his students, and he was never condescending to his students. It was always, that he felt he was learning as much from them as maybe they were learning from him, and that open channel. And I think it's really important that in our world we have that, and hopefully bring back again that idea of common respect and of each other.
And Jeff, your feelings about the relationship between the industry and the private vintners?
Very briefly, I think that the film shows that there is a certain continuity. Big business, big industries tend to have their fiscal interests at heart, first and foremost. But at the same time, I think we've seen a lot of benefit from the money, the investment that the large wineries, the large corporations have put into research and development in viticulture and enology. So it's a double-edged sword, or it's not one or the other. There's good and there's bad, and that's kind of the way life is. But hey, Josh, can I just saw a question come in, and the question was, if with your permission, can I bring
Absolutely.
this? So the question was, did André only make kosher wine? And I think we need to briefly address that. André did not make kosher wine, okay? I make kosher wine. And as such, I think André definitely has influenced me and the wines that I make that are kosher. But I think this film, as Mark has said, and I think it has a universal theme, or a number of universal themes that can be embraced by Jews and non-Jews alike. But I think it's important that I bring up, just for the record, the fact that Jewish winemakers are very, very much involved in the history of Napa Valley. And I picked out 12 winemakers, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. I've got 12 names that I'd just like to run down, because I bet you don't know that these Jewish winemakers make these wines. It's going to take me 1 minute. So here we go. Bob Levy, who has long been the head winemaker for Harlan Estate, one of Napa's most famous wineries. Alan Boots Bronstein, who until recently, they both passed away, they started Diamond Creek, a hugely famous, successful winery based on the concept of terroir, which is the ecology of the vineyard, which is something that André was so focused on. And then I imagine you've heard of Baron Philippe de Rothschild. He, his family owns Mouton Rothschild, but he also, with Robert Mondavi, started Opus One. And so I would say he's one hell of a Jew to have come to Napa Valley. He owned like one of the most famous wineries in the world. He came to Napa and with Robert Mondavi helped elevate the whole spirit of winemaking in America. Then there's the Sands family. They happen to own a small wine company called Constellation. Constellation actually is probably the biggest wine company in the world. They own Mondavi now, and they own half of Opus One, but they started by making Concord grape wine in New York, 4 generations ago. Then in the small winery department, there's Art and Judd Finkelstein, Judd's Hill. There's Daniel Barron, Silver Oak. Ernie Weir, Hagafen, the only kosher winery currently in Napa Valley. My winery's in Berkeley. There's the Herzog family, who probably make more kosher wine and import more kosher wine than any Jew and any family in the world. They also have vineyards in Napa. to their credit. Matthiasson, small cult winery, organic. Half of them is Jewish. Spring Mountain, Jackie Safra, the famous, the wealthy banker and investor on Spring Mountain Winery. And then my late partner, Leslie Rudd.
It's okay. It's okay. Take a second.
So Leslie was Jewish, even though it was Radinsky, I think.
Sounds to me, Mark, like this is potential subject for another film.
Well, anyway, so I've recovered now. So Leslie Rudd, to his credit, created a beautiful vineyard in the Napa Valley, Rudd Vineyard and Winery. And he also, at the end of his life, he died 2 years ago, he owned some 30 different wineries throughout the wine country. He made a serious mark on California wine. And number 12, the 12th tribe, last but not least, is Jamie McCourt, née Luskin. How many people have heard of Jamie McCourt? Well, she happens to be the American ambassador to France and Monaco, and she owns 3 gorgeous acres of vineyard in Rutherford above the Auberge du Soleil. And in fact, she calls her vineyard Auberge. But I have the good fortune of making a certain amount of that wine as kosher wine. So I take about half of her grapes and we make something called Beshert, which will be released soon. And I highly recommend it. It's an extraordinary vineyard.
And for those who don't know the word Beshert, it is meant to be. It must be so.
Yeah, it's kind of like
as destiny. Yeah.
Yeah. So
as this meeting is today.
I would say that's just the tip of the Jewish iceberg in California wine.
Mark, since we're on the subject of spirituality and religion, you don't really address that aspect of André's life. Did he grow up very religious in Moscow? And what was the genesis of his relationship to organized religion over his lifetime?
André was a very spiritual man, and I think due to also his upbringing, he was a very private man about his spirituality. He never tried to put one way or one system, and I think part of it also is growing up in such a time where one way or one system really destroyed, let's say, our family's livelihood and our family's way. He was a very tolerant man, and I think that's also passed down through my family. And my first schooling was in a Jewish school in Israel. My parents are also, fairly, let's say, spiritual in that sense. André grew up Russian Orthodox, but he never pushed that on anybody. He did love to have his Russian Orthodox celebrations with the Pascha and all of those things. But when his second wife always says, Dorothy, that the Blini had to be exactly as he remembered 70 years ago. The way the taste was. I mean, he was a very, all of the senses had to be there for that to happen. But I think he had an inner strength to him that was amazing. And that inner strength was part of that, let's say, also from that inner strength, when you are having that strength, you don't have, let's say, these other aspects of worried about your own ego or where you're going with that and who you are. I never knew as a kid how important he was as a winemaker because he never talked about that. The modesty, as Christian Moix, one of the great French winemakers and vintners, also now France and California was influenced by André. André was, a teacher to us all in winemaking and modesty. And I think that's also the part of his spirituality was that modesty and that tolerance. And I think that's another thing in our world we need more of is tolerance, isn't it? I mean, it's something which, and someone asked me, Tina Stauber, who was actually helped me with the film and organized some of my early travels, and she asked what was the most difficult part of the film and what I'm most proud. I'm proud of just finishing the film, let's put it that way. I mean, it took me 10 years, and most producers don't want to hear that, but it was then 10 years. The last year I found footage that I didn't have that I was able to put into the film. So it, some things like wine was organic, it took time to plow the fields and to get the seeds to grow and then find and then crush those grapes. And that was all, that's a wonder. I have actually a half an hour of Francis Ford Coppola talking about how winemaking and filmmaking are so similar.
What, you mean we have absolutely no control?
Yeah. in the end, we may not, it's, what are these destinies? As Herman Hesse said, there's no such thing as coincidence. But also for me, I'm just proud of also the fact that the film's out there and maybe touching people in some way. And maybe that's what, and I must thank all of those people who helped me along the way, all the winemakers who took their time and let me live with them and be with them and spend time. And they opened up a whole new world to me about my great uncle and then all of those who helped support me. I had even my dear mentor and friends in Thailand, the Chandlers, they came in at the end and really helped me finish the film. And so I could edit it with another Jewish filmmaker, Michael Chandler, who lives in Moab, Utah. He helped me edit part of the end of the film and helped me write it. So I'm very, very appreciative of that.
It really needs to reach a much broader audience, and I'm sure that it will. And we're grateful to be a part of creating a springboard for that. But the work you did, Mark, over 10 years was indeed beshert and very, very much appreciated. Jeff, I'm very curious about the state of your vineyards in Israel and winemaking in general in Israel. What's happening there?
Well, I think André would have loved to have come with us to the Galilee and the Golan Heights, because again, when you walk the vineyards of Israel, on the hills of the Galilee, it looks very much like some of the great wine regions of France, notably the Rhone Valley, with red soils and lots of limestone rocks. If you go to Leslie Rudd's vineyard in Oakville, you'll also see the red soils and gobs of limestone, very similar soils and very similar climate between Israel and California. So when Leslie and I first went to Israel in 2011 as winemakers to look around, we were struck by the similarities between Israeli terroir and France's Rhone Valley and Napa Valley. And I think that we shouldn't have been surprised, because while I actually think probably they were making wine in the Crimea maybe a little bit earlier, but they've been making wine in Israel for at least 3,500 years or more, because it's a great place to grow grapes. And I'm not talking about the Sinai, where they're now expanding viticulture, but I'm talking about traditionally in northern Israel. It's just like the greatest regions of Europe and America. And so that's what inspired us, not only the terroir, but also the connection to our heritage, which is there so obviously beneath your feet when you walk in the vineyards of Israel. And so I've lived in California for 25 years and made wine here and in New York, but I tell you, in Israel, I really feel that connection that I probably would feel if I were French and had a French winery, or if I were Italian and had an Italian winery and vineyard. I don't feel it quite the same in California, even though I'm at home here and I love it. But in Israel, there's that visceral connection that I value tremendously. And making wine there is not a whole lot different than making wine in California, to tell you the truth. But the feeling is different.
I can't imagine any place where the roots run deeper than in the Holy Land.
Well, for us, no, it's true.
So the scenes in the movie of André talking to the vines and putting his ear to the casks and to the earth,
Yeah, it's great.
and getting his message, very clearly, that was how he got the information he needed to follow his intuition and make such fantastic choices that led to such important wine.
Can I just want to add?
Yeah, please.
In doing so, it's obvious. I mean, I knew this before I saw the film, but it became even more apparent how André really raised the bar for California winemaking and the winemakers since I think he arrived in what, 38, was it, or 37? I don't remember which year.
38.
Yeah, and it was a pretty Napa Valley, Northern California was a bit of a backwater at the time. We were recovering from Prohibition. It was kind of haphazard winemaking techniques, pretty dirty, pretty whatever, and I think that André really, with his training from France, where he was trained as an enologist, he really managed to turn things around and raise the bar. And I do see a correlation here between André's activities here in California and what Israeli winemakers who have trained in France and California have brought back to Israel. And you'll see that the Israeli wine scene, which now there are probably about 400 wineries in Israel, whereas 20 years ago there might have been 4, I think, is just exploding in the same way with a higher level of winemaking than we've ever seen before. Whether it's kosher or not, it's all Jewish, I can tell you that. Well, mostly. There are a couple of Palestinian wineries also. They're doing very well.
Lastly, I'd like Mark to comment. One of the things that struck me so profoundly was how every aspect, from the people that, build the machines to the people who harvest the grapes to, every worker, every component has an equal role in the process. And André obviously understood that and promoted that, that it was really egalitarian and everybody was equal, and I think you illustrated that well. Do you want to comment on that aspect of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, André, again, going back to what I said earlier, he wasn't a condescending fellow. I mean, whether you're the vineyard worker or the guy in the cellar, what he expected from you was what he would do, which was, he wanted perfectionism in a way, the best you could to give if you're at it doing your job, but he would respect you for who you were, and he didn't care, where you came from. He didn't matter whether what heritage you had and what color skin you had. What mattered is what you were doing and how you were doing your job, and he loved people and he loved sharing, and he was very I think again the world needs more people like that can be an example in this way, and steer us more to having a world of honoring each other more rather than less, and of inclusive rather than exclusive. And André was a very inclusive person.
I think the subtleties and the complexity in wine reflect everyone who has a hand in creating it. Isn't that true, Jeff?
Absolutely. Everything matters in winemaking. Everything you do, from the vineyard to the bottling line, everything makes a difference. and attention to detail. I'm sure it's the same in filmmaking, is critical. You need to watch everything if you want to produce the best quality product you can. So yeah.
So Neil, are you still, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
You probably, as many winemakers do, you know, you're thinking about your babies at night. You have to go there 2 in the morning to check to see what's happening. And that's what is the sign of a great winemaker, that care and that passion and that love. And I think that transcends to anything we do in life. It doesn't matter if you're a shoemaker, if you're a lawyer, if you're a writer. It's that passion and doing it the best we can, and finding that passion in our lives. It doesn't matter what we do in our lives, but do it with that passion. And also that then helps the others around us, because then we're happier. And if we're happier, the others around us can be happier. And I think that André showed a way of life that was really beautiful, regardless of race, religion, creed, political, views. And I think we can all learn from that. And I'm delighted that, I have this deep also from childhood connection with Israel. And I'm so delighted that we could have this part of the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival. And thank you so much, because it's important. I think it's also important can't wait to go. I'm sure you too, as we spoke earlier, to go to Israel and see. My film was also in Israel and in the Haifa International Film Festival, and I couldn't make it there because it was premiering the same time in Mill Valley. And it was like they were same time almost. So I would have missed one or the other.
There's a 10-hour difference, Yeah.
I want to get to a couple of questions before we wrap it up for today. So there's a comment and a question. Someone who watched the film and loved it said they loved when the workers were singing while they sorted the grapes. And she also wants to know, Jeff, if you make music in relation to your wine. Do you play the bagpipes too?
No, but I was a professional saxophone player for 20 years. In fact, I was the band leader for the Grand Casino in Monte Carlo. I worked for the Prince Rainier. I have, I'm a musician, although I'm not playing anymore. So what happens in our winery is that the guys love to have music on. And the problem is that I can hear everything from my perch above the catwalk in my office. And so if the music is good, in my opinion, no problem. En bayat, as we say in Israel. But if I don't like it, I feel not only is it bothering me, but it's not good for the grapes. So they have to find something else. But we do have a lot of music going on in our winery that I think is the grapes like, because the wines are coming out okay.
Has there ever been a study of how different music affects any part of the process that you know of?
I think Mark said it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark, you want to comment?
No, I just want to say that everything is important.
Right.
So, wine is an organic substance. It's a living, breathing substance. We have live yeast in there fermenting away. And after that, we have live bacteria doing their bacterial fermentations. And I think everything is affected by vibrations, the nature of which is the essential nature of music. So absolutely, if you're going to have heavy metal going on during your fermentations, your wine's going to be different than mine. We've got a lot of Jewish folk music and jazz and you name it, but softer.
Well,
okay, so go ahead, Mark.
If I can make a quick comment about wine and winemakers. Jim Allen once told me, who was this big man who founded Sequoia Grove, and he was a big man and a wonderful man. And he said to me, he goes, André once told me, every winemaker is in his or her wine, meaning that if you find a wine that is gentle, and that you'll find that in the winemaker. If you find the winemaker, the wine being more aggressive, maybe that was that year that winemaker had more aggression. So that André always felt that the way the winemaker is transcends also into the wine, or we bring upon onto others and onto the wines. And it's great. I love this fact that you're making music with wine now, and I love that.
I think it's wonderful to believe again that human nature is part of nature. And that's a message from today. So Jeff is providing us with a case of his mixed case of his glorious kosher wine. Someone also asked, so you can maybe quickly comment, what makes wine kosher? But tell us a little, before we announce who the winner is, tell us a little bit about the assortment that you provided.
So we have 12 bottles, that would be a case, of 6 different wines that we make, 2 of which I make in Israel, and 4 of which I make in California. We have a bottle of 2 bottles of our Blue Sea Adom. Blue Sea, well, it's just a big C. It's the C from Covenant, or maybe I should go like that, yeah. And my wine labels from Israel are all blue and white because that's the color of the Israeli flag. So, and the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, which is not far from our vineyards in Israel, happens to be blue also. If you've ever been to the Mediterranean, it's quite blue. So the Blue Sea Adom is a blend of Syrah and Cabernet Sauvignon, some of which is grown in a biodynamic vineyard, which is uber organic, in the Galilee, the Tzivon vineyard. And the Cabernet actually comes from a vineyard in the Golan Heights. So it's a blend of 2 different regions, 2 terroirs, kind of diametrically opposed from each other, with both in northern Israel. We also have a bottle of 2 bottles of Blue Sea Viognier. Viognier is one of my favorite white grapes. It's famous in the Rhone Valley, and it's starting to become famous in Israel. And the vineyard where we grow these grapes is just on the border with Lebanon. You can actually put your hand through the barbed wire fence, and your arms in Lebanon and your feet are in Israel. So it's right up in the northern Galilee. Then I have 2 bottles of Red Sea Red. Red Sea, okay, as in like, you know, the parting of the Red Sea. That is also the sea from Covenant, but it is red. And it's kind of like the perfect Pesach wine, you know. And it is a blend of various red grapes that we source from Sonoma and Napa. There's the Red Sea Sauvignon Blanc, 2 bottles of that. There are, we gave them 2 bottles of Covenant Lavan. That's my favorite of all of our white wines. It's our Chardonnay from the Scopus vineyard in Sonoma, on Sonoma Mountain. Scopus being a reference to Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, and it's owned by a Jewish guy who was born in Tehran and grew up in Jerusalem and eventually found his way to California. So he calls his vineyard Scopus. And then we have 2 bottles of Zahav. Zahav means golden gold in Hebrew, and it is a beautiful late harvest dessert wine that you can enjoy before or after dessert, depending on what your whim might be.
That is an incredible indulgence of riches, Jeff. And if I may say, you are the embodiment of André's spirit today. So I'm so grateful that you joined us. So the winner is, drumbeat, Carol Poquet of Las Vegas. So okay. Congratulations, Carol. Jeff, where can people find your wine?
Well, our wines,
if they didn't win it.
Yeah, our wines are found all over the world. We're in, 20, 25 states in America. In Las Vegas, we do have distribution through one of your sponsors, Southern Wine and Spirits. And I don't know exactly where you can find it. I know we're in a lot of great restaurants that are probably not open right now, but hopefully they will be soon. And I imagine we're in some wine shops as well. I just don't know exactly where in Las Vegas.
And people can order online directly from you, right?
Yes, you can go to covenantwines.com and order any of our wines directly from the winery, and we ship to most states in America. Obviously, if you live in London, Paris, Israel, Taiwan, Tokyo, South America, Mexico, you can also find our wines. And just if you can't figure it out, just go to our email and ask us a question. We'll get back to you at covenantwines.com. There's a way to ask, where can you find the wine?
So I need to express our gratitude to our host sponsors and to all our sponsors. I'm going to let the closing words be yours, Mark, since you're the creator of this amazing vintage film, and then we'll say goodbye. So stage is yours, Mark. Send us off.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Jeff, for joining us. I can't wait to go to Israel with you and see these beautiful vineyards there, and maybe even walk the vineyards in California and hang out in Berkeley and listen to some great jazz.
Let's do that.
And drink some wine.
Yes.
Let's do that. And maybe come up to Las Vegas again. I love your town, and maybe we can do a screening in a cinema where people are actually sitting and drinking a glass of wine while watching. I mean, I made the film for the cinema. I hope that we get through this difficult time, and my prayers are with all the people that are suffering. I've lost a couple friends myself, and I know that we're all touched in one way or another, but I think we will get through this as humans are amazing in this way. And if we do it with, from our inner strength and with love and compassion and wisdom, we will walk a beautiful path forward. And I'm really grateful for the fact that we can, be together even in this strange new environment of Zoom and all of that, but at least we can, have these conversations and we can still communicate. And I think that's important too, that we don't lose this communication.
Okay.
I think the film, if anybody wants to be or see the film, go to my website, AndreTheVoiceOfWine.com, and or if you want to help me get the film out and have ideas, or want to help continue sponsoring, figuring out a way to get it out to the public, because that was hopefully going to be in the cinemas this year, but now we're doing it this way, and I hope that all of you that were participating got to see the film. If not, please let Joshua know, and we'll make it available for you if you haven't seen it. Okay, I'll make that promise to you, Joshua, that anybody that wasn't able to see it, they'll still get to see it, because I think that's part of being in this webinar is important, that they get to see it. So I thank all of you, and I for all those viewers too, because filmmakers, like winemakers, we make the wine, we make the films for others, ourselves too, but mainly for others. And without the audience, it seems pretty empty. And I hope that the film will find a place in the future. And many distributors have told me it's an evergreen film, because it's not about a certain time. It'll last into the future, and I hope it does. And so,
on a closing note, I just want to pop up the slide for the Napa Valley relief effort that's going on to help those impacted adversely by the fire. Do we have that slide, Neil? So you can go to napavalleycf.org if you have the ability and the willingness to help many people who, especially workers that have been displaced. That would be a good mitzvah. We're going to say goodbye to our special guest, and we're going to be showing you a preview of our next film, which is actually a short film that I made called Live to Bear Witness. This is a Holocaust education film that features local survivors and local students, and the survivors ask students questions, and the students, to the best of their ability, answer the big questions about the importance of remembering the Holocaust. So we're going to see that preview, and gentlemen, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you all very much, and may blessings be with you, and may you all stay as healthy and safe as possible.
Okay. Very good. Good night, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Do we have a slide for when the next film is showing, Neil?
Yes, Danica will put it up.
Okay. And thank you, Neil. So that's going to be Wednesday, November 18th. The film will be available to watch at the Film Festival website, and people will be getting an email for that as well who have registered and participated. Good evening, all. Be safe. Be well.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you very much again, and you all be safe too.